Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic conversation show. John Suntress here, very excited about today's guest, Tony Hendra, a great writer for National Lampoon, a great editor for National Lampoon as well, and performer on the National Lampoon Radio Hour and the National Lampoon Comedy Albums. In fact, one of my favorite bits was called Magical Misery Tour, where it was a parody. They actually took the real words from a John Lennon 1970 Rolling Stone article, put them to music, and Tony, in a great Lennon imitation, basically did a song version of that Lennon interview. It's very, very funny. You can hear it on YouTube, and it's a great piece of comedy. Guess what? National Lampoon is back in the comedy album business, and Tony Hendra and his group, The Final Edition, perform new sketches in a new album, the first in 35 years. The album is called Are There Any Triggers Here Tonight? The setting for the album is at a community college where the kids are a little upset that their safe zone has been upset by Tony and the performers as they do these sketches. Great stuff, and coming at a great time. You might remember that just a few weeks ago, the University of Chicago in my neighborhood stood up and said, guess what, kids? No safe zones. You learn by hearing other people's views, whether they are offensive views or not. And that's a great move because it seems like comedy is under siege on campuses. Literally, a comedian's getting booed off stage for getting a little spicy with their material. That's weird. I grew up in a completely 180 environment where we kind of invited subversive and satirical comedy that would be considered offensive, but again, it's a joke. So it's really interesting to hear Tony's view on today's environment and what he is facing on some college campuses. But it seems like the new album is fantastic. Tony also is an incredible author and wrote about why the original subversive movement ended in the 80s. We talk a little bit about that. You probably know Tony best as Ian Faith, Spinal Tap's manager in the funny mockumentary This is Spinal Tap. We talk about Tony's experience working with the Spinal Tap guys, but he has a long history with these guys. Christopher Guest, Bill Murray, John Belushi were among the National Lampoon Radio Hour cast members, later to become all Saturday Night Live members. And Tony also was involved with their original stage show, Lemmings, which featured all those guys, including Chevy Chase as well, and Gilda Radner. Gilda also a big part of the National Lampoon Radio Hour. So it's great to hear Tony talk about the past, the present, and the future of satirical comedy today on Word Balloon. Really happy to bring you this interview. It is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you, League, for your continued support, subscribing to Word Balloon via Patreon. I thank you for that. It gives me the opportunity to do great interviews like this wonderful one today with Tony. So if you have interest in subscribing to Word Balloon is free. It will always be free. But if you want to help the cause out with a subscription, just even $1 a month, go to wordballoon.com, click on the Patreon page, and you can contribute right there. Thank you very much, League of Word Balloon listeners, for your continued support. Don't forget this new comedy album, the final edition of National Lampoon Present, Are There Any Triggers Here Tonight, is available now as a download and a CD. Go to Amazon, go to iTunes, anywhere you purchase downloadable music, and you will find this comedy album at a very reasonable price. I really enjoyed a lot of the sketches, and it has that spirit and pacing that classic National Lampoon albums had. And of course it does, because Tony was a big part of the Radio Hour and the comedy albums themselves. As we go into the interview, one little disclaimer, unfortunately. When I did the interview, I had a couple technical difficulties, and everything looked like it was recording fine. Tony's volume was recorded extremely low. Good news, I was able to boost it, and you can hear him fine. Sadly, you can also hear me breathing incredibly heavily because I had to increase the volume. I just want to point out two things. One, I am not aroused by our conversation. Two, I am not having a heart attack during our conversation because there's a lot of heavy breathing during Tony's responses, and it's only because I had to augment the volume so that you could hear it. But really, this is a really fun interview, and I really want to help the cause out because I'm really glad that the Lampoon is back in the business of doing good comedy, because there was a really long period where the National Lampoon name was used on a lot of really bad direct-to-video movies and even lousy ones that made it to the screen. And yes, I'm talking about crap like oh, God, I don't even remember some of the names. John Lovitz was in a few of them. I remember Loaded Weapon. I really didn't find that very funny. And that was really one of the ones that even made it to the screen. But so many bad things. And, in fact, Tony talks about the people that had the National Lampoon brand and how they kind of ran it into the ground. But new owners, and the great thing is they've gone back to basics and tapped Tony to be among the people that are going to, I hope, bring this creative revolution back to the National Lampoon brand. So I'm all for it. And, again, I think it's a really funny album. So if you can suffer through my heavy breathing, I think you're going to hear a delightful conversation with Tony Hendra. Let's present it now. Tony Hendra from the National Lampoon and the Final Edition talking about Are There Any Triggers Here Tonight, a brand new National Lampoon comedy album, first in 35 years. Let's talk about it now on Word Balloon. Man, Tony Hendra, welcome to Word Balloon. As I was just telling you off the air, I am a longtime fan and am so thrilled that you're on the podcast. It feels like in this current environment, we need the cavalry of satire to come in. And I think you guys, the Final Edition and stuff, you've got the talent and experience to be that cavalry. So welcome to the podcast and a welcome voice to this current environment we're living in.
Very nice to be on the Word Balloon. Absolutely.
Honestly, this new album is great. I can't believe it's been 35 years since the last National Lampoon album. But honestly, man, the brand has really taken a beating in the last couple decades with some really lousy movies. So thank God you guys are getting back to your roots and doing what you did best.
Yeah, well, that's really one of the intentions of the album, is certainly to try and resuscitate the brand a bit, because it's been the problem really has been that over the last 2 decades, as you mentioned, it's basically been the magazine or the company, National Lampoon Inc., has basically been run by morons and criminals, and quite often both. And literally criminals. The last proprietors before the current proprietors actually went to jail for kiting the Lampoon stock. One of them for 4.5 years, and the other one for life.
Wow!
So those are the kind of people who'd be making the decisions, about what to put the name on, and that's very sad, really, considering what we were in the glory years, and for a few years after that too. So it's very nice to hear you say, John, that Are There Any Triggers Here Tonight is continuing the line.
Well, and you fall right back into your usual formatic patter and what made those sketch albums so great. And I didn't realize that your group, the Final Edition? Is that separate from the Lampoon? Tell me about that, because that's the comedy group led by you that is performing all this material, right?
Yes, exactly. Well, for the Final Edition, I founded the Final Edition about 5 years ago, and the first thing we did wasn't on radio. It was to do a parody of the New York Times by doing it, because you remember 5 years ago, 2011 and so forth, everyone thought the New York Times was going to go under, finally. It's going to go out of business.
Yep.
So we decided to do the Final Edition of the New York Times. And it was great fun. The building's on fire, all the editors are running for the hills. and that was a big success. We did it with Slate, and got hundreds of thousands and millions of views. And then we decided we would sort of continue as the Final Edition. In other words, use that name to set up a group and a website that did satire in the tradition that I'm used to, obviously, which is the National Lampoon. And one of the great things that meant was that we could start a radio show in the tradition of the old National Lampoon Radio Hour, and that's what the Final Edition has come to be. The Final Edition Radio Hour has 2 wonderful casts, one in Los Angeles and one in New York. And we put out a weekly radio show on a number of platforms. You can find it on iTunes usually. And then so the time came when it seemed logical to put out an album. And what with all the fuss and trouble on campus about trigger warnings and safe spaces and microaggressions and speech codes of one kind or another, that seemed like a wonderful topic to get into, which is basically what this album attacks in its own special way.
Absolutely.
And that too is like in the tradition of the Lampoon. I mean, the Lampoon was first and foremost a campus magazine. I mean, the vast majority of our readers were on campus. So it's only right and proper that we should go back to the well.
Absolutely. I was a little brother, amongst my older brother's penthouses and Playboys, there were Lampoons, and I'm sure half the reason why he was buying it was for the tits. I won't deny that. But
yeah, sure.
And I mean, you guys knew it when you were making it as well. But that was my entry to the Lampoon, and I would just read those ridiculous letters to the editor, and just fun stuff. And in fact, your guys' first comedy album, you have an excellent performance. You parody the John Lennon, the infamous John Lennon 1970 Rolling Stone interview, and put it to music. Oh, dude!
Which unfortunately we can't quote very much of.
Well, this is a podcast, so you can swear if you want to. It's okay.
Well, the one line which I always quote is which is fairly clean is. I was the walrus. Paul wasn't the walrus. I was just saying that to be nice, but actually I was the walrus. A lot of stuff like that.
Well, and you would end these direct quotes from. It's interesting because really it sounded like I never really compared the actual interview that John did with your parody, but essentially you do it, and then it's great because every now and then you would just end a rant with a rhyming lyric and stuff, and it's so. Magical Misery Tour is the cut for people who want to find it, and it's from. Was it Radio Dinner? Was that the first album?
Yes, that was the last cut on Radio Dinner. Yeah.
Oh man.
Find it on YouTube. Actually.
Exactly.
A lot of different versions of it.
Oh man.
So that kind of sketch comedy that we really sort of invented at Lampoon. I mean, a certain kind of sketch comedy. Anyway, let's not say it wasn't done before.
Sure.
But we sort of took it several steps further than anyone else had done. I think even Second City, and that's what we continue to do in Lemmings, and also in the Missing White House tapes, all three of which I had a hand in.
Absolutely.
That's what we're up to with Are There Any Triggers Here Tonight?
That's excellent, man. And I'm based in Chicago and read that press release that the University of Chicago put out. And honestly, I was so relieved because it's about time that a college finally stood up and said, "Hey, fuck you and your safe spaces. This is a place where you have to hear different voices that might offend you. But how are you going to really learn if you don't expose yourself to all the voices out there and make up your own mind on what's going on and what you choose to follow or believe?"
Yes, I mean, I think that's certainly on one level that's a thing to be deplored because it's talk about the deplorables, but it is to be deplored. But there's also the even simpler thing, which is that why are you worried about trigger warnings in articles when there are 300 million triggers in the country and a lot of itchy fingers longing to squeeze them?
Absolutely.
It's just a strange response to a very polarized and dangerous time to be worried about these kind of things. So anyway, that's yeah. So we take that on. The album takes the form of a college concert that the final edition is doing at a small community college in Trickledown, Ohio, and basically the campus, the student body is offended just by the title of our album. They're immediately offended by the title of our album, and they accuse us of using sarcasm. And somebody says that one of the hecklers is actually heckling because he's a sarcasm survivor. Anyway, so then we decide that we'll just do our most innocuous material first, which is not that innocuous, so as not to offend them. But by the end of that side, the side 1, 2, and 3 on this CD, and by the end of side 1, they're now burning recycling bins, and one woman has a rape whistle, which she blows every time somebody laughs. So it's like that. But then it continues, and we just sort of up the ante until basically at the end we've completely cleared the campus, and all you can hear is the proverbial cricket. But in the course of it, we do some pretty tough. In the course of it, we do some pretty tough satire, which I think is also called for.
Agreed. Absolutely, man. No, good stuff. Great stuff. ISIS, Bernie Sanders' sex movie. Fantastic. Which among my favorite bits, absolutely.
On healthcare.
It's my responsibility to make you come as well.
Yes.
That was beautiful, man. No, it was great. That's the thing. You got great people working with you. I mean, the spirit is back. I mean, that's the thing. The vibe is there for a veteran that appreciated the old stuff. And I hope this is the beginning of more albums. I mean, you've got the final edition show, and I assume, do you test stuff out on the show and then put it on the album? How did that work?
Yes, sure, absolutely. I mean, we've actually been doing the show now for almost 5 years. I mean, we started in 2012, so at the end of this year it'll be coming up to 5 years. So we've got a huge archive, and we certainly, if we can get a few sales,
please.
We'll certainly be putting them out on a regular basis, and we've also got another special project that we're doing for Earwolf, which is coming up, which is about the Supreme Court, which is hilarious.
Oh, that's fantastic! Oh man, when that's ready, I hope you'll come back and we can promote that as well, because it'd be my.
It's called Men in Black.
Oh, fantastic! Go on.
But these guys are really wonderful. We have great men and great women on both coasts, and it's they're just really, really good, and really good voice actors and really good writers too. What's I think probably unique about this group is that the writers are the same people as the actors, and so that gives everything a great crispness and a great sort of just a great sense of group that we have. So anyway. Well, I'm so glad you like it. That's great, John.
No, truly, absolutely, man. I really did. I mean, there's, something like every comedy album. I'll be completely honest. There's bits that are amazing, and there are bits that it's like, okay, all right, I get it, and we'll move on to the next bit. The great thing is they're very quick, and again, I'm used to that format. I mean, I was a fan of the the original Lampoon Radio Hour as a kid as well. 600 stations in its prime, as the Lampoon documentary told me, which blew my mind.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, we managed to get rid of most of those by being very rude to sponsors, but...
And my God, the nucleus of what became Saturday Night Live and other great comedic efforts. I mean, Belushi, Bill Murray, Chevy Chase, of course, in Lemmings, Gilda Radner in Lemmings, and on a lot of the radio bits as well. Christopher Guest, and again, these were all just voices in the air before we got to recognize them on TV on Saturday Night Live. And I think that's the great thing about your new group as well, because then they can slip into these characters very comfortably. And whoever was doing the Bernie imitation was fantastic. And this is great. So I hope you're teaching the children. Now you're in that Crosby, Stills and Nash mode of the career. You're teaching the children well.
No, it is very gratifying, I must say, to be able to do that. And a lot of my cast is half my age, and some of them are like a third of my age. So it's great to be able to pass it along, and they certainly seem to. They certainly seem to have risen to this this sort of challenge of keeping real satire alive, and I think it's an incredibly important thing, actually, and especially in a highly polarized society, that we have that we have people really doing hard-edged satire about the things that people don't normally laugh at or think you shouldn't laugh at. As Lenny Bruce once said to me, the best laughs you can get are things when you make them laugh at something they're not supposed to laugh at. And that's really that's really the motto on our coat of arms, such as it is. I'm
interested in your beginnings because I'm really fascinated by the British comedy movement that you were young enough to be part of and also experience. I'm assuming as someone slightly younger, because going back to Beyond the Fringe. And when it came out, and as you just said, really was, certainly in British circles, this, my God, how dare they make fun of things that, so yeah, if you wouldn't mind explaining that kind of environment, because there were the Goons, and I'm sure you grew up on the Goons, Peter Sellers' old radio show for people who don't know about the Goon history, and they should read that, because that's an amazing story unto itself. But yeah, can you tell me about that time and experiencing that stuff and what it must have done to kind of trigger some of these, influences in yourself?
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly, I'd be happy to. I like talking about my own life immensely. But Beyond the Fringe was a really epochal show. I mean, it influenced certainly an entire generation of people who possibly some like myself would not necessarily have become satirists. But it certainly inspired us to do so. What it was the first time. It was a theatrical review, and it was the first time really where all the sacred goods of the British Empire and Britain in general, I mean, anything that you can think of that was sacred to the truly loyal Brit, whether it was the monarchy, Shakespeare, the BBC, the Church of England, public schools, all these things were just assembled on one stage and eviscerated by this brilliant young team of four men: Jonathan Miller, Peter Cook, Dudley Moore, and a very famous English playwright called Alan Bennett. And it was just mind-boggling. I mean, it not only was it hilariously funny, like waves of laughter in the theater, just laughing at these things that had never been laughed at before, it was a huge hit. It came to Broadway eventually, and really spurred, I think, all the satire, the tremendous satire that came out of Britain in the early 60s. In Cambridge, which is where I was, this was actually done by two guys from Cambridge and two guys from Oxford. Mm-hmm. And the Cambridge guys were Peter Cook and Jonathan Miller, and both of them had been in an organization called Footlights. And Footlights was a kind of satirical society, not unlike the Harvard Lampoon, perhaps in its heyday, and except instead of doing parodies and so on, we did a theatrical review at the end of every school year. So Beyond the Fringe had started as most of the material had started as review material in that format.
Got it.
And these guys just put it all together. So, but Footlights was an extraordinary group of people at that time. Not only did it have Peter Cook and Jonathan Miller, who were like a couple of years before us, but David Frost had been the president of Footlights the year before us, and it was now down in London preparing a show called That Was the Week That Was, that had an enormous influence on British television satire. And my year had, amongst other very brilliant people who had huge careers in England later, but had John Cleese and Graham Chapman of Monty Python. So these were contemporaries of mine, and I worked with them, on stage at various reviews and nightclub shows and things that we did. In fact, Graham Chapman was my first professional comedy partner.
That's crazy. That's awesome.
Yeah. So anyway, that's really where a lot of and there was a similar organization in Oxford and in a couple of other universities too. So it was something that was really powerful and much needed at the time, because certainly we all needed a good laugh after World War II, after all.
Absolutely, my God. Well, exactly, and as decimated as England was, and the need for, bundles for Britain, I know continued on, for a while in the post-war years. And no, I've heard people like Ted Koppel talk about growing up in England and then coming to America at a young age. And, now your years before coming here, because I know you came in the very early 70s and stuff. So in that post-Cambridge period, were you doing variety TV and playing at dinner clubs or whatever the live comedy scene was in England at that time? What were you doing?
Well, actually, Graham and I worked together in London for about 6 months, I think, and then he decided he wanted to become the doctor he'd been studying to be at Cambridge. So he went off to St. Bartholomew's Hospital, and I had to look for another partner. But I found another guy at Footlights, and we became a comedy team of the same sort, doing very much the same kind of material, which is kind of two-man sketches, you know.
Sure.
Although sometimes we played many more characters, like we did a takeoff of the UN in which we played like 20 characters, and that was great fun. But no, we came to New York in 1964.
Oh, damn. Okay.
Yeah, and we actually were invited by a comedian who we'd been playing with in London called Jackie Mason.
Sure.
And Jackie Mason actually signed my application for a green card.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's fantastic.
It was great. And we came here and we got off the boat early one morning, and by that night we were appearing at a place called the Bitter End, which is still there.
Sure.
The street, and got like 6 months of work. We appeared at a hootenanny for about 5 minutes and brought the house down. And the first job we got was opening for Lenny Bruce 2 weeks later.
Wow.
At the Cafe Go-Go. So yeah, we've been rubbing shoulders with. I've been rubbing shoulders with the great and near great for a long time.
That's awesome. You know, Lenny Bruce is a presence on the new album. Are there any triggers here tonight? And I'll let people experience it for themselves. But I thought that was pretty cool.
I don't think we want to put in your podcast.
All right. Yeah. I don't think I'd actually want to play the cut because exactly. But no, but that's the thing, man. I mean, it's a joke, and I think people like I was about to. That's why I wanted you to go back to your beginnings because of World War II and the horrors. I mean, people were clearly depressed. I don't think comedy went as far as you guys did prior to World War II, obviously, but maybe in some real raunchy kind of publications and things like that. Certainly not in broadcasting, and probably not in the live theater, experience. But we're at a point now. It was so weird. You guys all pushed the envelope. You guys and George Carlin and, people like that really had something to say beyond the humor and really had a very important, point of view. And certainly coming in that Vietnam era and everything and Watergate, that was a real necessary time. I mean, and again, here we are. I guess my point was, what goes around comes around because, God, we thought Nixon was a jerk and just kind of a douche. And we really didn't know until Watergate how, kind of scummy. Well, I guess, again, I was a little kid, but we really didn't know until Watergate, the mass public, what kind of douche he really was. And now we've got a douche running for president. And it's like, well, and they seem to be okay with that. So, like I said, the satire cavalry needs to come back again to kind of like say, no, really, like take a look at these guys. And thankfully, there have been things like Daily Show and John Oliver's great show last week tonight and Samantha Bee and people like that. But, it's funny that radio, you can't do it on radio. And I really feel like audio sketch comedy went away for a while. And again, when I was a little kid thinking about getting into radio, I'm like, oh, maybe I could do that. That would be great. And I literally, just as I was coming of age in the early 80s, that's when it all died out. Yes. No, it disappeared very quickly. It was, I have my own theories about that. Please. Book about it. I want to read that. Please give the title of your book because I only just discovered it in the press releases they sent me to talk with you. But yeah, please mention the title. The title is Going Too Far, and I wrote it in the late 80s. And it's really a history of what I called various things like, sick, anti-establishment, and then a whole bunch of other adjectives like that was called this particular kind of humor. But the humor satirical humor that really began in the mid-50s with Lenny Bruce and Mort Sahl and was continued by Second City and then eventually by the Lampoon and, the great comedians of the 70s like Lily Tomlin. You bet. George and Richie Pryor and so on. Sure. And so it's basically a history and analysis of that. But yeah, I mean, I think satire is an immensely important factor in society, as I said, and its basic job is to prevent power from becoming corrupted. As we all know, power tends to corrupt, according to Lord Acton, and that's our job, is to stop that happening. And so I think, I don't think I would say that we have a particular message. I mean, we're just as you can tell from the album, we're just as
we're just as hard on our own as we are on the enemy, if you will.
Sure.
But that was always the case at the Lampoon too. I mean, we were always very tough on the movement and left wing politics when it became absurd, which it frequently did, as we were, at the hands of Nixon. And I mean, you have to remember that, it works. I mean, and then satire actually achieves something. I mean, Carl Bernstein, who was one of the two people who brought down Nixon, became a friend of mine in later years, and he once commented to me. He said, if it hadn't been for the National Lampoon, we would never have got Nixon to resign.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think that's. I mean, Carl has a sense of humor, so I'm sure there was a little bit of a joke in there, but I think he half meant it too. He really meant. I mean, by the time Nixon resigned, it was 74. We were reaching probably 10 million people, most of them under 30, in across the country. I mean, our circulation was 1 million by then, and it was there was a huge pass-along rate with the Lampoon.
Sure.
Which means, the hand-to-hand that certain magazines are given.
Absolutely.
So yeah, you've got to keep plugging away. Sometimes it doesn't show, but sometimes it does. And you get rid of a criminal in the White House.
But back then the mainstream, or at least parts of the mainstream, because the man who backed Lampoon was the man who created the Diners Club credit card, correct?
Yes, and he also created Weight Watchers magazine.
Oh, okay. There, yes. I always forget. That's right. Weight Watchers, and I'm a fat guy, so I do know this. Weight Watchers and Lampoon were published by the same people. That's right.
Exactly. I always loved that. His name was Matty Simmons. I always loved that he first of all, he started the Diners Club and got enormously fat. Started Weight Watchers magazine and lost a lot of it.
That's fantastic. But I was going to say, because back in 72 and 73 and 74, during the whole Watergate scandal, artists of the mainstream were not afraid to stand up. Stevie Wonder had that great song, You Haven't Done Nothing. And it was absolutely him yelling at Nixon and throwing it all out there. We're sick and tired of your lies. And try and imagine, and not to pick on him, but like a Justin Timberlake suddenly standing up and recording Hillary Clinton, we don't like you. Donald Trump, we don't like you. We don't like either one of you. Right, exactly. But the great thing is you guys had, that great subversive humor, and luckily you had guys like Manny that would back you and everything. Now, there are different platforms for this stuff to come out, and I wonder how you feel about the current platforms where audio exists, like podcasting and streaming and stuff. Streaming sometimes is backed by the man. I know you're part of this iHeartRadio. You're going to have an iHeartRadio channel if you don't already.
Well, the Lampoon has an iHeartRadio channel, which we've been providing the content for, because they don't really have a sort of an ongoing creative team.
Sure.
So we're providing that for them, and that seems a very natural thing to do, which is why we asked them to, co-sponsor the album. But yeah, the larger question I mean, I have this sort of fake statistic, which is that the 97.3 of the young males who use the internet think they're funny as shit. And the good news is that 96.7 of them aren't.
Yes.
That's really the problem, which is that there's just so much dreck out there that you have to wade to get to the good stuff. That the opportunity is less than it might seem on paper. So you do have to put up with an awful lot of not very good comedy in order to get, as I say, to the good stuff. But I mean, that aside, it's obviously fantastic that that you can sort of make your own radio and have all these platforms to distribute it on. Because I mean, I don't think there's any medium as good as radio or as audio, let's say.
Agreed.
For satire, because it pulls the listener in, and so that she can use her imagination, and you can build a sketch anywhere you want. You can put Pope Francis and, you know, a team of gorillas on the moon if you want to, and for some reason, you know, and do it. And all it takes is a few sound effects.
Absolutely.
To do that on video would cost you a fortune.
Yeah, that's...
You'd have to get the Pope, for one thing. You'd have to hire a lot of chimpanzees, which I'm sure costs a lot.
No, yeah, go on.
Audio is fantastic that way.
Well, and that's the thing. I agree with all of you, everything you said, because there is so much comedy dreck that is on YouTube, and I appreciate the energy and ambition. But what's missing is, they got to get their 10,000 hours in to actually get funny, first of all. But then also, like you say, you can do anything with audio, and that seems to have fallen by the wayside. I mean, God, I have a daytime radio job, and, CBS Network is selling its radio division to buy into a movie company. And, radio has homogenized itself to, it being very inconsequential beyond local news and maybe some entertaining talk, but certainly not, the challenges that I guess you guys even faced doing a funny radio show back in the Lampoon days with the FCC. But I mean, it's just, I don't know, it's hard. But thank God now we do have podcasting and stuff, so you can gather an audience. But it's tough to find you. I didn't know that you had been doing this final edition stuff for the last couple of years. The last thing I heard you on was on an NPR panel show a couple years ago, and it wasn't even something that my NPR affiliate regularly ran. But it was great, and it's like, oh goddamn, there's Tony Hendra. I loved him in Spinal Tap. I like his Lampoon stuff. It was good. It was good to hear you back, man. So
Well, I mean, it's very difficult. Well, that's what I mean. With all the noise going on, it's very difficult to stand out. And even if you've got, even if you've got a track record, it's just there's a lot of noise out there.
Sure.
So it's anyway, yeah. So it's kind of splendid that we've got this album out. I mean, I'm deeply grateful to my people, all of whom work pro bono, which is amazing, and have done for years, and are just the most talented people I've come across for a long, long time.
Do they ever perform? I mean, are they stand-ups as well as radio or audio actors? I mean, and do they take some of this material and do it on the road if they are stand-ups themselves?
Well, I don't think certainly some of them have. A lot of them, in fact, my partner Jeff Kreisler is a working comedian and has he's got a number of awards, in fact. And so several other people in the teams in one coast or another who either work in the theater or do stand up. But one thing that I would love to do, and I think people would, my cast would love to do, is actually take some of this stuff live and start doing live shows. So it's another reason we want the album to get out there and be an advertisement for us, so that we can get some bookings.
That'd be great.
I think it'd be hilarious.
Absolutely. Well, Lemmings was such an amazing live show, the precursor to Saturday Night Live, and featured Belushi and Chevy Chase and Gilda Radner, and I'll let you fill in the rest in terms of those people that did become Saturday Night Live people. And again, this was before Saturday Night Live, so it really did kind of become a thing. And were you the director of the stage production, but also, or did you also do? I know it's on film. Did they release it as a movie, Lemmings?
Well, it wasn't. There was a very bad video version of it, which you can see actually. I mean, it's not very good quality, but because it was like 1973, there wasn't.
Sure.
It looked like everybody had an iPhone. but it was it's got Belushi and Chase and of course wonderful Christopher Guest.
Yes.
In doing all these parodies, but yes, I produced it, and I mean I wouldn't say I directed it exactly. It's sort of this group was kind of a little hard to direct. Well, you can imagine Chevy Chase and John Belushi. I mean, Chris would listen to what I was saying, but they basically did what they wanted. So you could say I misdirected it, or I overlooked it or something. But yes, I mean, I was involved with it and co-wrote it, and actually I wouldn't say I discovered John Belushi because he was at the Second City already, but I certainly gave him his first job in New York and off Broadway. So that was a fantastic show, and that did extremely well too.
I'm really interested in Belushi and guest time at the Radio Hour because, again, being a fan of the albums, and in fact, in the Lampoon documentary, someone is like, "Hey, man, like, pay Belushi some sort of stipend to keep him here because you're really gonna, this is amazing, and we don't want to let this comedy genius go away." And it sounded like he was very involved in the Radio Hour stuff, and I'd be interested in hearing about Belushi and guest involvement.
Well, Christopher he never actually directed. I don't think he may have directed individual shows, but the original producer, sort of director. Again, it was a troupe that sort of did its own direction, really. But was Michael O'Donoghue, who was my co-producer on Radio Dinner. But Michael actually didn't do it for that long, and John seemed like a powerful enough person to take it over. So it was given to him to direct, and he then pulled in all these Second City people. Like Brian Murray and Bill Murray,
sure,
his brother, and Gilda, and then a number of other very talented people. But those obviously were the people who ended up in Saturday Night Live, and Chevy was there for a couple of years too, I think, in and out. But Christopher's contribution there was as a song parodist, but he was a brilliant parody. He had brilliant parody voices, and he could do just about anybody or any type. Immensely valuable talent. But I think one of my favorite things he did on the radio show was something called the liberal middle class blues. The well-intentioned liberal middle class blues, which is basically a sort of Pete Seeger type.
Yep.
Singing the well-intentioned liberal middle class blues, but John was John thought he was a good impressionist, but wasn't terribly. He was a brilliant. He was obviously a brilliant comedy talent, he and Chris, I would say, were kind of the backbone of the group. But I mean, there were other people, other terrifically talented people doing the show. Obviously, with Bill there and Gilda and so on.
Sure.
But anyway, so they were. It's one of the interesting things about the radio show was it wasn't very political, which I always found a little frustrating. But it sort of it began running after Watergate, so it didn't really, or it may have launched like during Watergate, but then continued after Watergate, after he'd resigned. I always felt that we could have done more of the kind of material that we do on Are There Any Triggers Here Tonight at the Radio Hour, but it just wasn't. It wasn't sort of the time for it. As a matter of fact, once Nixon resigned, we were up shit creek, right?
This is true.
Ford was just like a wet flannel. He wasn't worth satirizing.
Sure.
But kind of like Trump. Who can satirize Trump? It's not that he goes further than you'd ever go. It's just like he's a non-entity. He's a mouth driven by an ego, and it's a fucking reality star. I mean, who satirizes reality stars? You know what I mean?
No, but like, do you feel as a satir? Oh, I'm sorry. Finish your thought, and then I'll ask the question.
No. We do occasionally do Trumpian things, but they're usually about something, people's reaction to Trump, or the fact they're supporting him, or something like that. He's sort of beneath us, we feel.
Well, because I know Roseanne Barr, and of course a headline. You know, people who write headlines, you want to kill them sometimes, because Roseanne Barr was basically saying, I'm for a Trump presidency because of the comedy that it will provide. Not that she wants him to run the country, but oh my God, you know, when you got an idiot at the wheel, who the hell knows what'll happen? So I would imagine, as a satirist, as much as Trump in his own incarnation isn't much, but God, you know, yeah, I would think the same thing, that although a Hillary presidency could easily, provide it material as well.
I was about to say, yes. I mean, absolutely. I don't think either of them are going to be terrible for satirists. But but again, it's like if he does get it. Well, actually, we did this long ago. We did this at the Lampoon in 1972. We founded a fake PAC, which was called Satirists for Nixon Agnew. Re-elect them and keep us in business, you know. And yeah, that's the same thing Roseanne was saying.
Absolutely.
But if he does get in, what I'm really looking forward to is Trump's cabinet. I think that's going to be really...
I bet, yeah, really.
I think it'll be all human. I think there might be some animals in there.
Yeah, that's a Justice League I really want to see assemble. Yeah. Yikes. You know, and you mentioned Christopher Guest, and I want people to know, if they dig up old Lampoon stuff, killer imitation of Mr. Roberts' Neighborhood. And that blues song that you mentioned, If People Loved Mighty Wind, it really is that same character that he did in The Folksmen. And it's that great Pete Seeger kind of warbly voice. No, he's great. There's Oh, it was exactly. Yeah, little Kate Hepburn in there, exactly, man. So can I got to ask the obligatory Spinal Tap questions and stuff. So yeah, tell me about the experience. I mean, Rob Reiner, the director. I mean, again, all these people that had these Lampoon backgrounds, and not only Lampoon, but Michael McKean coming from, was it Credibility Gap? Was that his group?
Wow, you do know your stuff,
dude. I swear to you, I am. Like I said, this was my shit. I mean, I loved all that stuff back then. And again, really thought, when I get into radio, I want to be in a group like that. We had a group in Chicago called The Usual Suspects that came from Second City. And they were very funny. They were not in the Credibility Gap or Acme or Ace Trucking Company, Fred Willard's group. You know, I mean, so yeah, that's why I was just like, this is going to be great. And it all went away. While I was in college, it all went away.
Reagan somehow managed to make it disappear. I don't know. He didn't make me disappear, but I mean, I kept doing it. But and George kept doing it, to his eternal credit, George Carlin.
Oh yeah, of course, yes.
But somehow the Reagan sort of made it all disappear. But you should read my book to find out why I think that happened.
No, I really do. I absolutely, and I have the full title for people. It's Going Too Far: The Rise and Demise of Sick, Gross, Black, Sophomoric, Weirdo, Pinko, Anarchist, Underground, Anti-Establishment Humor.
Right.
You can't fit that on a paperback cover, unfortunately. But so tell me about Spinal Tap, because again, in this void, or what seemed to be this void, at least this piece of satire manages to come through.
Yes, I mean, and it is satirical. I mean, a lot of it's parody, obviously, but it does have its satirical moments. But anyway, so the way it happened was the way I got into it was through Rob, actually, who was an old friend of mine from even before Lampoon days, when I lived in California. I got to know him, but and he too was in a group called The Committee, which was an offshoot of Second City.
Yes.
So he called me up one day and said, "Look, we're doing this takeoff of a really bad British heavy metal band, and we'd like you to be the manager. This real, sleazy, untrustworthy character. It's perfect for you, Tony." And so I said, "Well, that sounds great. Can I see a script?" And he said, "No, we're going to improvise it all." And of course, Rob and all the other guys were used to doing improv, and I'd never done any at all, believe it or not. I was terrified, but I did say yes, because it just seemed like a great, fun project. And really, the rest is history. I mean, we instead of writing a script, we improvised about 20 minutes of what would probably be in the eventual movie, scenes that would be in the eventual movie, and that was our kind of calling card. And Norman Lear became the producer, who obviously had produced All in the Family and a number of other great series in the 70s.
You bet.
Particularly because Rob Reiner was a star of it.
Certainly.
But and he produced this as Spinal Tap. What can I say? The rest is history.
That's great, man. Yeah, no, really tremendous stuff. And again, yeah, probably the thing that you're most known for. But it's great that it's like, instead, and I was, I likely am saying this in the introduction, you're that guy. Because it's like, oh, he was Ian Faith in Spinal Tap, their manager. Oh, that guy. And, oh, yeah, he did that John Lennon bit, that was the Rolling Stone magazine. Oh, yeah, that guy. And I mean, that's fantastic. So I'm really glad that you're. So yeah, but less people bother you then when you're trying to get somewhere, and so anonymity has its benefits. I certainly can appreciate that. As we wrap up, I just want to know, because one of the projects that I hear you're working on through the information given to me is a possible scripted program based on those early Lampoon days. Is that right?
Yeah, that is true. I don't want to talk about it too much because I regard it as bad luck.
I understand.
But no, I've been working on this. I've been working on a series with a wonderful writer who was actually part of the Lampoon, called Janice Hirsch, and Janice has an enviable and long track record in some of the best comedy that's been written in Hollywood in the last 30 years, which includes Frasier and Murphy Brown and Will and Grace and lots of other stuff in between. So she and I have written, we've written a pilot and a couple of episodes.
That's great, man. I'm really rooting for you guys because I really think that creative time, and again, I guess everyone's childhood is their golden age, but it just seems to me, as someone that was younger, growing up around this stuff and hitting adolescence as you guys were kind of hitting your peak and stuff, that really was an interesting creative time. And I think it's something that HBO tried to do this year with Vinyl, and, I kind of misfired. And it's like, yeah, but, again, publishing, I know too, I talk to cartoonists on my podcast as well. And I know that, God, and again, the Lampoon, my God, you guys had some of the people that I've talked to, Russ Heath and Neil Adams, and, some of those wonderful, superhero cartoonists that were also drawing incredible satire for the Lampoon back then as well. So yeah, it was an amazing time for real, interesting creative voices, and I think is, the kind of thing that would make a very great television show, given the obstacles that you guys had back then, and comparing it to today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the sort of bottom line here is that without being sort of precious about it, I do think that these times are very similar to the 70s in the sense that there's deep polarization, deep anger, and I don't want to get too serious about it, but I think there's a lot of things are very similar, and that's one of the reasons why our humor ought to reflect that. And I hope, I hope the final edition isn't the only organization that decides to take satire to a new point. But that's certainly what we're up to.
Absolutely, man. No, it's no. I'm glad you're back on the front lines on the fight. I think speaking for the audience, we need you. So no, this is great. Again, are there any triggers here tonight?
Like the famous Lenny Bruce routine.
Absolutely. New National Lampoon and Final Edition product headed by Tony Hendra. It's been a pleasure, sir. Seriously, I'm really glad you're back, and I hope this isn't the only time that you wind up on the podcast. When you have something new to talk about, like the earwolf thing, please come back.
Well, I would love to, John. It's been great talking with you.
So pleased with my conversation with Tony Hendra. Sorry for the heavy breathing, but are there any triggers here tonight? The new comedy album from National Lampoon and the Final Edition, available now everywhere where you get downloadable music, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, you name it. Also available at Tony's website, thefinaledition.com. Don't forget, too, that the Final Edition has their own channel on iHeartRadio. And, actually, Word Balloon is now available on iHeartRadio, along with Stitcher and SoundCloud, Last.fm, all those other alternatives to iTunes. Nothing wrong with that. However, you need to get a Google, is it Google Voice? I think it's Google Voice, but wherever Google has its podcast, Word Balloon is on there as well. So, tell your friends if they don't have an iPhone, if they have an Android device or whatever, plenty of ways. And, of course, the website, wordballoon.com. Thanks again for listening. Questions or comments, reach me via email, john@wordballoon.com. You can follow me on Facebook under my name, John Suntress, and the Word Balloon Network. You can follow me on Twitter on @JohnWordBalloon. And I look forward to your comments. I hope you liked today's show, and I hope my heavy breathing didn't turn you off. Until next time, thanks for listening. Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions, copyright 2016.